All right, guys, welcome back to the Desert Spring. Thank you so much. I want to commemorate you guys for the last video. I was really kind of blown away by the response by that. I genuinely didn't expect that many people to stay to the very end. I was expecting only one or two people to send me my little phrase that okay, so maybe it's a kooky phrase. It's just what popped into my head in the moment. But I really do want to appreciate you guys for that because, I've been doing this for a long time, and it reminds me of my first kind of videos that I used to make that were like 45 minutes long. And I'd look at the engagement on those videos, and people would stick around for like 2 minutes, and then it would just be 0. And then my videos would get like 3 views and stuff like that. So I really do appreciate you guys. It genuinely means the world to me. So as a reminder, on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, we're starting a live stream. It's going to be Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central, and it's just going to be me supporting people. If you have something that's bothering you, if you have something you're trying to walk away from Christianity, or you're just dealing with something in your life, or you just want support in other ways, you just need a compassionate ear to listen to. 8 p.m. Central. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do it for 1 or 2 hours. I feel like 2 hours in the beginning is going to be kind of a drool, so I may just start off with a 1 hour and just see how things go. The only thing I'm concerned about is that 1 hour I may only be able to do like 2 people in a single, kind of live stream, or maybe just a single person in a live stream, because normally, 30 minutes, clock can tick by pretty quickly on that kind of stuff. So with that being said, if you guys do feel like you want to speak to me individually, let me go ahead and put my thing up here on the screen, bottom banner right there. You can email me at the Desert Spring, not the Desert Spring, it's just desertspring111@gmail.com, and I'm always free and open to kind of help you guys out through anything. So with that being said, let's kind of get into the video. So I had a couple of comments that I thought were really funny on the last video. One of the comments was from a very a wonderful person who had made the statement that he could see that I was still living out Christ, and that that God is slowly beckoning me back toward Christianity. I do want to be very, very firm with something from the get-go. God is the one who led me out of Christianity. Okay, I know not everybody believes in God, and that's cool. At the time, I genuinely believed in kind of like a singular little dude floating around in a cloud. Since then, I genuinely just don't think that we can ever know what it is. I'm kind of an agnostic theist. I think if I had to throw terms, I don't like throwing terms just because in general I don't like labels. I just enjoy appreciating things for what they are, without labeling stuff. But with that being said, I do think that I wanted to talk about that because I get that comment a lot, even with my sister and with my family. The second comment that I found not funny, but very beautiful and very kind of, it was a beautiful comment. Came from a relatively new subscriber, and she had, sorry about that, but this commenter had basically, said, you did that. Praise. It's okay to praise yourself. This person grew up in a home where clearly, praising yourself over God, I grew up in kind of a similar Christian home where, God took 100% of the praise 100% of the time. And to ever think that your efforts were good enough, to achieve, it's like genuinely this is how my church was. It's like if you got into medical school, that was God. If you got into college, that was God. If you got into a residency program and matched to a great hospital, that was God. It's just like completely negates all the work that you did and gives 100% of the glory to God, to their God. And the reason for that is because in the Bible it teaches that all of our works are filthy rags, and so there's this constant kind of pull toward there's this constant pull toward like I'm not worth anything, and that was a big problem. So with that being said, to the commenter who left that, genuinely thank you so much. I loved all the comments on the last video. But what I did want to straighten out is this, because I do occasionally get Christians commenting, and even with my family, my mom, who is one of the, most interesting people that I know. She's one of the most interesting Christians that I know. My mom tells me all the time, she's like, yeah, John, you really just embody Christ and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, all I do is I love people and I'm compassionate towards people. There's no part about me that feels the tug to go back to Christianity ever, right? There is a part about me that feels the tug to be more self-expressive, to allow more of myself through, and to stop, kind of judging myself for certain things. But, taking credit for yourself, which is one of the things that this person had commented, taking credit for yourself, I can't give any of the credit of my transformation to Christianity. Genuinely 0% of the credit of transformation goes towards Christianity, right? In that story I told, in that video I told my story of how I walked away, how I prayed to God to put me on a path that leads me straight to Him, and how He immediately took me off of Christianity, walked me right out the front door, and, a bunch of dreams and a bunch of coincidences showed up and put me on a path towards more enlightenment teachings, right? And so this is why I hold the belief that, we're all connected and we're all of one mind, and we're all these beautiful beings, these beautiful things that are living out this beautiful experience, and that you can choose to focus on what it is that you want to focus. But I did want to make it a strong statement that Christianity did nothing for me, and that's what this video is about. It's about the Christian bypassing. It's about the spiritual bypassing that happens with Christianity, and how, being on the path that put me more in line with enlightenment teachings. Now, you don't need it. I just want to say that. You don't need any spiritual path, okay? If God is genuinely all loving and all caring, it does not matter. You should be able to do absolutely anything on this damn planet, hurt absolutely anyone on this damn planet that you want. Please don't do that. That's mean. And still be completely loved and embraced by God, right? And I think that's what all of the atheists argue to Christians all the time, is that their God of all unconditionally loving, all unconditionally knowing, He's everywhere at every time and all this kind of stuff, but at the same time has in the Old Testament that He regrets creating humans, and how every single time He, seems to freak out about something, His solution is to kill half the population on the planet, if not wipe the entire population of the planet out, except a couple of people. And it's just, that's the problem with Christianity. I was just commenting kind of on a previous video with somebody, and I posed him a question, and you could see the acrobats. You could see the acrobats that this guy was having to jump through, because, he was sitting there telling me, the Bible's the only complete divinely inspired word of God. And I said, okay, well, so why is it that there's books outside of the Bible that contradict with the Bible? And the only reason why they're not accepted is because they don't fit the narrative, right? Because there's a bunch of books of the Bible. I want to say like 95%. You have to go to Mindshift and I forget the guy's name. Dartrell. I forget his name. But they do such an amazing job of kind of like pulling up the data on it. But ultimately, we don't know who wrote the books of the Bible, right? I mean, Genesis and Exodus and all that stuff, those are contributed to be written by Moses. But So Moses was supposedly this guy in Egypt. So we should find something in the Egyptian writings about some sort of plague, some locusts, the firstborn of every person being killed, the mass exodus of slaves, and we just don't see that, period. So there's no evidence that Moses ever existed, right? And so these are the acrobats that I don't care to that I'm so happy I'm free from. But it's, it's kind of a make it make sense kind of deal. So with that being said, let me just turn this banner off. It's kind of bothering me a little bit. With that being said, one of the biggest thing, I would say the biggest thing upon leaving Christianity that I had to confront, and this is why I kind of enjoyed my specific path, because it wasn't just a path of like, okay, well, Christianity is not true, and now I'm just kind of doing my own thing. I had a small period of like that, like I told you guys when I was in college. But ultimately, the path that, the divine put me on, or whatever the hell it is, or the whole of conscience, or whatever the hell, it is, we can't know, is what it comes down to. Even every near-death experience that you watch, they always talk about this, there's this wall, and we just, even though the people who've kind of popped out of their bodies temporarily and popped back in, they ultimately have not seen what it is or know what it is. And so to say with absolute certainty 100%, I think it's going to be a hard pill for everybody to swallow. But ultimately, I want to say this: the taking responsibility for your thoughts, for your actions, for your life is something that Christianity doesn't do too well. Atheism does great. And I think that my path also did incredibly well at, was kind of the whole thing of, there's nobody coming here to save you, so take care of yourself, right? One of the biggest problems that we see with Christianity is that people put everything on God and refuse to do anything, right? In my household growing up, you guys obviously had just heard my story. My mom would constantly be praying away the demons, praying away the devil, and praying away Satan and all this kind of stuff. Yet she refused to take accountability for the hurts that she was causing. She would be on top of my sister, throwing punches, bashing my sister's head against the wall, and then go and not apologize to my sister, but instead go to the church and to the pastor and say, I need you to pray for me because the devil has come into my home. No, deal with your own shit, right? You are pissed off. You are angry. My mom's gone through a lot of stuff, a lot of shit. And so I'm compassionate towards her. But it is our responsibility as an individual person to deal with our own individual traumas and to heal our own individual traumas, especially if you want to live an expressed, beautiful, joyous life, all that kind of stuff. You don't need Christianity. You don't need spirituality. You don't need an enlightenment path to live a wonderful, beautiful life, right? What do you need to do to live that wonderful, beautiful life is to lighten your load, right? The only reason why I can have the life that I have now is because I've had to lighten my load. Because when I would carry all of those burdens around with me everywhere I went, life sucked. And as you know, I hated every second of it, right? And so I very often mention going on two paths, going on the forgiveness path and going on the self-love path. Those are two very, very distinct things that I didn't hear about while I'm not casting judgment on people who have left Christianity towards atheism. I love you guys. I love Christians. I love everybody. I don't want you to think that by any means I'm casting judgment. But, the one thing that I really, really liked an idea that I never heard of that I really, really liked that kind of came from some of these Enlightenment teachings was that everybody in your life is a mirror. And if everybody is mirroring something about yourself back at yourself. And that comes from the Enlightenment idea that we're all of one mind and we're all individual souls on a journey path and we're all helping each other grow and all this kind of stuff. Now, whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. You can toss that out the window at the back door. It genuinely doesn't matter. But there's a principle there that's very, very beneficial and useful for growing, right? And that principle is that everybody's a mirror. And so think about that, okay? Let's say that you have a situation where, I keep dating these guys, but every single guy that I date ends up cheating on me with my sister, or something like that. They end up leaving me for my whatever, for my best friend, whatever. Right? And so if you're not paying attention to your life, you're just going to go throughout your life saying, oh, I just hate guys. I hate men. Every single guy that I find ends up leaving me for some other dude. I'm sorry. Or whatever. I don't know what kind of dynamics. I'm trying over here, okay? But yeah, the thing that I loved about it was and I hated this. I really hated this because who likes looking at their shit? Nobody likes looking at their shit. It's shit. But the thing that I really liked about the Enlightenment teachings was it put the responsibility back on your shoulders. Okay, why do you keep going for guys like that? Right? What is it that is in that person's subconscious that they're holding up this little flag that says, hey, I'm the epitome of the red flag and I have just the traumas and just all the insecurities that resonate with your childhood. And so, I've got this. And you got people who are putting up faces, but they start dating each other. And after a couple of years, they end up being exactly like their parents, right? Or you have these kind of dynamics where it's like, I always end up in a situation where every job that I go work at, my bosses are just so micromanaging and so oppressive, and I never have the space and freedom to be able to do what I want or to even be a human being. I'm always just being oppressed. And so the Enlightenment teaching part of that would say, well, what inside of you is okay with that? What inside of you is aligning with that? Right? Because your story is, I always have these shitty bosses, but then the subconscious story is that when you're applying to jobs, you're always applying to shitty jobs, right? Or maybe you run around and, maybe there is some sort of, and this you can take it or leave it, but it's kind of one of the, in the all mind, whatever, who knows, right? But, it could be a very thing that, you have this oppressive boss and he hires people because he feels good about a person. Well, why would he feel good about a person? Maybe because you give off the energy of a person who's constantly taking crap from people, and he's the kind of person where he gives the energy of he's constantly giving crap to people. And so you both feel comfortable with each other because you're both, you're both, what do you call it? You're both kind of resonating with that, right? You're both comfortable with that dynamic. And so subconsciously you end up choosing that dynamic. And next thing you know, you end up in that very same situation, whether it's a boss, whether it's in a partnership, or whether it's with friends or whatever. I remember, I'm going to tell you a fun story. I was in Alaska, and my dad is just domineering guy, just a domineering guy, just in your face, always commanding, always doesn't see himself, doesn't see how he hurts people, doesn't see what he does, how it affects him, the life is always crapping on him, although you can see the whole damn circle of how he goes out, he treats people like shit. People come out and then they don't want to help him, and then he gets to live his story of nobody ever wants to help me. No matter what I do, nobody ever wants to help me. And it's like, it's because you treat people like shit. Your story that you're so focused on is nobody ever wants to help me. But every single time anybody gets close to you, you start treating them like shit, and immediately they don't want to get close to you, right? So when I moved to Alaska, I was moving away from family to get away from family. And lo and behold, when it came time to start making friends, I was just trying to find people who felt right and all this kind of stuff. And I'll be goddamned if I didn't end up making a friend that was exactly like my dad, just constantly domineering over me, constantly, trying to frickin' control me. And it was just like, what the shit is this, right? But there was a part of me that was open, kind of was open to receiving that kind of treatment. And that person is the person who gives that kind of treatment. And so they're looking for a specific type of person to accept that treatment and to still stick with them through that treatment, right? And so you have these interesting dynamics. And so that's one thing that I loved so much about my path, that Christianity doesn't teach you. Christianity does not teach you to look at yourself, does not teach you to look at your faults, does not teach you to love your faults and to change, to consciously see yourself and choose differently and stuff like that. Christianity doesn't teach you any of that, period. And so that's why whenever I say, when a person leaves Christianity for atheism, that's ultimately, a step in the positive direction, that they're moving away from kind of like these crazy ideas, these domineering ideas. But your life can get much better if you kind of do the work toward healing, right? And so, I'm going to put out some more videos I have a playlist. I don't know if you guys ever looked into my channel. You'll kind of see a playlist where it says meditations and practices and stuff like that. And basically, these are just small kind of somatic practices that you can do. And they're all meditation based, because ultimately we're talking about the subconscious mind. If this all sounds kooky to you, you can look at research based off of, they did a research. I forget what university conducted this research, but essentially what they did is they took a bunch of people, and they took a couple of people who were thieves and burglars and robbers and stuff like that. And they, just said, okay, pick the people who you would prey on, pick the people who you would assault, who you would, burglarize, all that kind of stuff. And it just so happened to be that they picked on the exact people who happen to be incredibly insecure, who happen to have all of these issues, who had this kind of victim mentality and stuff. And so think about that, right? So that shows that there is this kind of natural, energy. There is this kind of natural energy feeling, right? I used to live in Alaska. When you're around bears and you act like prey, that switches on the money, the meal light for them, right? But when you act like a predator and you act like you could potentially take the bear and that you're not afraid of the bear, then the bear acts completely different, right? And it's all based off of this kind of subconscious conversation that's happening in body language, that's happening in whatever, and so it's kind of the same thing with dogs, the idea of smelling fear. It's actually really funny, because I did have that experience once where I legitimately could smell fear on a person, and I was like, that's crazy. I used to work in EMS all the time, and yes, you could feel when a person was really, really scared and they're about to die and all that kind of stuff. You could feel it, but damned if my brother, my brother's always been scared of me, kind of like I told you in the last, well, he wasn't always scared of me. He was only scared of me once I turned about 14 to 15 and really got good at using guns. And got really good at protecting myself. Then it switched from my brother being kind of a domineering person to being really, really scared of me, because he realized, like, oh shit, now I've really kind of fucked this up. Anyways, he came and he spent the night with me in my property here for just one night, and, I live out in the woods alone. I'm a country boy. I enjoy being in the country. I love the stars at night, and that's one of the things that keeps me out of the city. If I don't see stars at night, I feel disconnected, and I feel like I'm just like this human being that's stuck in a rat race, and I absolutely hate it. So I gotta have stars. So that's the reason why I live out in the country. But, my brother came and he visited me, and I say that he visited me. I drove into Houston and said, hey, would you like to spend the night with me up in the country? We can, have a cookout, campfire, all that kind of stuff. And he was like, sounds great. And we're driving, and it gets dark, and we start driving to my place, and I live way out in the woods, and it's dark, and my brother's a bona fide city dude. I mean, he is just, his favorite kind of like place to live is like in a downtown condo. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I can't do it. I mean, the guy has got a scooter. I can't do a scooter. My life's not built to do a scooter, but yeah, so he came to visit me, and I'll be damned if this guy was wearing fear so much, man. And I could just feel it insanely. Like this guy was so scared that I was about to kill him. And I didn't mention it because I knew right there, hey, so you think I'm going to kill you? Like right there at 10 o'clock at night when he's alone with me out in the woods, and like I'm apparently his nightmare or something like that. And so I just left it. I was like, this is a conversation for morning because I know he's freaking out. And, man, in the middle of the night, he wanted to use the bathroom, and he was just like, John! Like, fucking what, dude? It's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I'm gonna go to the bathroom, John. And I'm like, okay, bro. Fucking go to the bathroom. The fuck are you waking me up to go to the bathroom for? The next morning, he was just like, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't gonna, like, jump on me in the middle of the night. I'm like, oh my God. So... But no, but there is this very, there are these feelings, right? Ask a person, why is it that the third boyfriend that you've had is a narcissist, right? Why is it that your fourth husband is abusive? Why is it that, this is one of the things, and I know you don't have to do enlightenment teachings. Like I said, it was just my path. You can also go to therapy, to be frank, right? Therapy, if you do therapy specific to your trauma, if you go, every therapist is different in what they specialize in. And so it can get extremely expensive, which is one of the reasons why I kind of like slowly backed off of therapy after my divorce, was because every visit was $350. And while I was going to the university, and kind of had free therapists, it was great. I could go on a weekly basis, or a bi-weekly basis, just depending on my school schedule. But then after I graduated, I was like, oh, there's no fucking way I can afford this or continue to do this. Entrepreneur, I've never had healthcare, stuff like that. But yeah, ultimately it comes down to taking responsibility for your own thoughts, taking responsibility for your own actions, right? I hate this job so much, and then you get fired. Oh my God, the devil, Satan is after my family. I lost my job. Well, Deborah, you've been complaining about that job for the last 6 months. So your dominant, kind of your dominant body language, your dominant mind was that you hated that job. You really think that that's not going to come out of your body, and your boss is not going to notice that when he looks at his team and he kind of feels the morale of the team, you're always severely lacking in morale? Of course you're going to hit the chopping block, right? And so I love it because it forces a person to look at themselves, right? I know for me, I've told this story a couple of times on this channel. I always just kind of find it a funny story, but my story was, no matter what kind of girl I dated, I would always find the one that would leave me. Like that was just kind of the thing. And that was partly my dad's story, because my dad had been divorced 3 times. And so his story was very much, no matter who he loves, that person's going to leave him. And so, I took that on at like 12 years old and decided at some level that that was also going to be my story, because then I went and replicated that perfectly with every single relationship that I've ever had. All of my girlfriends, all the way up to my first wife, it was all that exact same dynamic. And it was the exact same dynamic that my dad and my mom were. The difference is that I didn't notice it. I was praying to Jesus, Jesus, please let me let me have a good spouse. Let me find a good spouse. God, please help me, all this kind of stuff. Constantly praying to Jesus, constantly trying to pray away the devil from these relationships, when enlightenment would say, hey, John, wake the fuck up. Why do you keep going for these kinds of girls, right? Why is it that you seem to have this subconscious magnet for girls that are going to leave you, right? And so this is where you can kind of dig into the psychology and do a lot of healing work. But I think it's incredibly important to do the healing work after you leave Christianity, because ultimately that's where you're going to find your joy and your peace in being outside of Christianity, right? I see, especially kind of like of my own friends and stuff like that in from high school and from college and things like that, that they've currently left Christianity. And one of my friends, I feel so bad for him, but he's left Christianity. He doesn't believe in God, but he still says things like, well, what does it fucking matter, because I'm going to burn in hell anyway, right? So that's a perfect example of a person who's left Christianity, rejected Christianity, but still has these subconscious beliefs of he's trash, he's garbage, he's not worth going to heaven, God doesn't love him if there is a God, he's destined to go to hell, all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's why I say it's not enough to just walk out of Christianity. You also have to do a lot of the legwork that's associated. You have to do a lot of the legwork that's associated with healing outside of Christianity. I say this time and time again. I'm sure you guys have heard this many times, but I always consider Christianity kind of this dirt in the soil, and you're a tree planted in the soil. And in the beginning, you were just a little baby. You were just this tiny little sprout in a single root, and you really weren't that deeply invested in Christianity. But as you grow, you turn 8 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old, 22 years old. You become a bigger and bigger tree, and your roots get deeper and deeper and more complicated, more complex. And so when you eventually walk away from Christianity, you take this big, massive tree and you rip it out of the ground. Well, congratulations. Now you're no longer, planted in kind of infertile soil, but your roots are still holding on to so much dirt. And so if you never deal with that, and you just go and you try to transplant yourself into better ground, you'll do better, but you'll ultimately still have a lot of these leftover residual fears, these residual insecurities, these residual things that you're going to be working through. Because genuinely, I mean, leaving Christianity is hard on the psyche, right? It's easy to intellectualize walking away from Christianity, because when you start looking at it, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, God is unconditionally loving, but he kills everybody on the planet at least 3 times, right? I mean, obviously that's dramatic. He only did it once. But, I mean, come on. He's unconditionally loving, but somehow he manages to find a chosen people, and he allows those chosen people to murder a bunch of other civilizations that he also created. That doesn't make any sense either. Adam and Eve were the very first people on the planet Earth, but whenever Cain leaves, he's afraid of a bunch of other people in the land of Nod who are going to come and kill him because they found out what he's done. Well, where'd those people come from, right? So it's just, there's so many issues. There's so many issues with Christianity, with the Old Testament, the Bible, it doesn't make any sense. Everybody knows that. And that's why when you're a Christian, you get to go to the mental gymnastics, really, where you're jumping through hoops and doing all these fucking circus tricks to try to make it make sense, when a person who's walked away from it is just sitting there in complete peace saying, I'm so happy I don't have to fucking act like that guy. You know, I'm so happy I don't have to fucking jump through the hoops and try to explain how God is still unconditionally loving, even though in Isaiah 7 he says that he creates darkness and that he creates evil. It's all quite healthy to step away from. But in stepping away from that, what are you stepping to, right? So that's the problem, is that if you weren't born in Christianity, if you weren't born as a fundamentalist, traditionalist, whatever, and you're just kind of popping around doing your own thing, and then you become a Christian later in life, and then you decide at a later time to, that's so funny. The guy that I just shared the story about is calling me right now. That's so funny. His ears must have been on fire. What is that? What they say? But yeah, when you're stepping away from Christianity, if you grew up in it, you have nowhere to go. And that's the problem, is that there is no clear direction on where to go when you want to go, So a lot of people just stay in church because ultimately their fear of hell wins over their desire to live an expressive life, over their desire to live a happy life, over their desire to take power over their abusive husband and leave the relationship and find something else, over their, whatever. And I know Christians in the comments are going to say, oh, well, the Bible says if your husband's abusive, then you can leave. Okay, that's great. Not every church believes that. Not every church agrees with that. And abuse is not always physical. And to be frank, the majority of churches mainly just consider physical abuse. They do not consider emotional abuse. They do not consider verbal abuse. And those are just as damaging as physical abuse. So if a person is getting verbally abused, my brother-in-law called my sister a fat cow, and I'm just like, dude, you're a fucking pastor. Why are you calling your wife a fat cow, even as a fucking joke? Like, first of all, you should never be calling anybody that, because it's not loving, it's not kind. But why the hell, as a Christian pastor, are you joking about your wife who has gained an extra 50 pounds having your fucking children, and you're joking about her being a fat cow? There's zero, but where does that come from? That comes from this idea that I am me, there is that fucking idiot, and screw them, and so that's something that Enlightenment teachings, I don't even know what to call them, because it's not a specific path, because you can't say a spiritual path, because it's like, that's so damn broad. That's like saying, oh, I worship Jesus. Okay, so does, or I worship God, right? Like, that is so damn broad. Like, you have to narrow, but I just don't really know. I really don't know how to narrow it. Because it's been such a weird path. But in seeing a person as myself, and is seeing me as a part of the planet, as a part of an ecosystem, as a part of a community, I no longer have the desires to throw my cans out the window, because I used to litter, I'm not going to lie. I don't have the desire to litter anymore, because I want to take care of my home, which I see, the United States, at least the land of the United States, is my home, right? I want to take care of the land. I want to take care of myself. I want to take care of the things that are in my life, right? Like my vehicles and the place that I stay at, and the what do you call it? The relationships that are in my life. I just had, whenever the Christian church came over to take my equipment, because their church had flooded, and I had given them a bunch of equipment to kind of, deal with the flooding in their stuff. The entire time they were around me, they were being incredibly mean to each other. Sure, they were doing it in a joking way. Oh, ha, ha, we're just joking, calling him a dumb idiot. That's fucking mean. And if you are going to bear the name of Christ or bear the fucking Christ-like whatever the shit that Christians always love to tout, then why are you so mean to each other? My experience, I was in high school, and I went over to my cousin's house, and I was being extremely mean to my cousin, but I was just acting the way that I acted in church. It was completely acceptable in the church that I went to say the insults that I said, act in the way that I acted. It was the way the congregation of that church acted. And I remember going over there, and there was a couple of kids there that had nothing to do with Christianity. They weren't Christian. They were, secular, whatever. And they were just like, wow, you're an asshole. I'm like, no, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm just being, and they were just like, no, you just called your cousin fat and you were like being super mean to your cousin. That's fucked up, man. And I remember just being so stunned in that situation because I was only acting the way that I had acted when I was in church. You poke at each other. Oh, it's just it's the funny thing, it's, oh yeah, you're putting on a lot of heavy weight. Now those pancakes are getting to, or whatever, Don't get me wrong, we should all, strive to live healthy lives, but, there are some times when people's lives are so dramatic and traumatic, then they want to eat down ice cream for the rest of their life, then fucking let them, If they decide that they don't want to heal and move on from that, then that's fine. You can hold them there and still love them in that space. You don't have to change a person, right? Just because you don't agree with what they think and what they believe. But yeah, ultimately, that was one of the best things about stepping away from Christianity, is that I had to take, and kind of like finalizing my thoughts and kind of bringing everything together, I had to take responsibility for the thoughts that I had, the life I was living, the fact that I was living in so much hatred and I hated my family so much. I had to deal with that, right? That was my burden to deal with, because I remember after I was in Alaska, I hadn't talked to them in forever. And I remember calling home and expecting them to just be so sad and be so filled with regret. And they did not give a shit. They were living their lives. My sister was off living her life. My brother was off living his life. My dad and my mom were doing their thing, And I just remember feeling like so enraged and pissed off that me leaving didn't bother them. Because, it was such a big, massive, impacting thing in my life. In my mind, it was like, how can it not be such a big, massive, impacting thing in your life, right? But that's whenever it kind of came down to, ultimately, yes, what happened to me sucked. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it damaged me, and I'm still healing from that to this day. I'm still working through things, even though I'm, I'd say I'm majority kind of fixed up. There's still a lot of things that I'm working through, and especially in relationships. But with relationships, it's a funny thing with relationships is you don't know what's going to come up until you're in a relationship and something comes up. So you can only do so much you can only do so much relationship healing outside of a relationship. But yeah, I just, I wanted to make that very, very abundantly clear, is that ultimately, the transformation that I've had in my life, would I give it all to myself? No. Because like I said, I was very much led on a path, and I asked, the divine, or whatever the hell it is, maybe just the whole of consciousness. Maybe I just asked myself. Maybe I just asked my subconscious. I don't know. But I asked myself to be put on a path that would lead me straight to, whatever the hell is, whatever, And and it was a very, very specific path and very, very specific teachings that were really interesting that I quite frankly didn't really find anywhere else. But in Christianity, you know, I look at my mom, and my mom struggles with the exact same things that she struggled with since day one. My dad has struggled with the exact same things. There's been zero growth in my dad. And when stuff gets bad in their life, they go to church and they pray to God and they give the church a little bit of money and they just hope the problems go away. It would have been better if they kept the money, because one of their problems is money, right? And so going to a church, sitting in a pew, singing some fucking songs, reading some verses that you've already read 1,000 times, and praying to Jesus is not going to do the fucking work for you, right? If you want to dig a hole, you don't just go to the store and go to the shovel aisle and sit there and ask the shovels, oh, which one is going to be best, and have a whole ass dialogue with the person at Home Depot about which shovel is perfect for the hole you're trying to dig, and then ultimately not buy a shovel and just go home and say, oh, I felt better. And I'm going to go next week to Home Depot to go find that same guy and have another goddamn conversation about which shovel is going to be best to dig this fucking hole. It's like, you gotta do the fucking work yourself, right? And so that's where guides help. I mean, I've had a number of guides in my life. I've hired probably maybe 3 or 4 different kind of spiritual therapists is what I basically like to call them. And all they really do at the end of the day, all they really do is hold up a mirror. And that's what I love about it. That's what I personally prefer about the spiritual path, is because in your ego and your mind, you get so focused on life is crapping on me. This is happening to me. This is happening to me. This is happening to me. This is all the wrong things that are going on in my life. And these are all the reasons why they're going wrong. And these are all the people responsible. And, you know, on the spiritual path, it just picks up a mirror and says, and what part of you is allowing that to happen to yourself, right? What part of you is allowing the abuse to occur? What part of you is allowing the insecurities to persist? What part of you is allowing the relationships to continue when you know you've had bad relationships with this person, yet you continually show up to be abused, right? And that's, you know, and so I just wanted to make this kind of video, because I do have a playlist. It's meditations and something else. I forget, but it basically, I'm still doing the content where we just look at the issues with Christianity and stuff like that. But I'm also going to be posting a lot more toward the other stuff. And as well as the thing is, I also had that, so I'm going to wrap up the video here just to let you guys know, but I also had that little playlist where we kind of like do like the experiments, the science experiments and stuff. I'm afraid if I put that there, I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. I may just post, you know, because I know eventually I would like the idea. I do like the idea of kind of having a website where people can kind of interact with me personally. And so maybe I just put the content there instead so that I don't confuse the algorithm. Because the thing is, if I start putting more science-based content out, you know, YouTube is going to say, hey, dude, you're in the deconstruction stuff. Now all of a sudden you're doing science. Okay, so we're going to pull you from the deconstruction and start putting you to science. And it's like, no. You know, oh, you're doing meditations now? Okay, so we're going to pull you from deconstruction and pull you from science and put you with all the meditation and the therapists. And so like, no, I don't want to be there either. So I do have to kind of like make these videos kind of in a way that doesn't confuse the algorithm, because ultimately this channel is still growing. So with that being said, guys, I really hope you appreciated today's video. And like I said, like and subscribe. If you can interact with this video in any way possible, that's going to drive the algorithm and kind of get the word out for people who you feel could benefit from this. And also, this is my email right here, desertspring111@gmail.com. If you want any support, you have any questions, you have anything tough that you're wanting to deal with, please reach out to me. You know, I am an open-hearted individual. I love everybody, and I am always willing to help as much as I can. And sometimes I'm not going to be able to help, and I'll just, and you'll just have to find somebody else, and that's fine. But, I'm always here to help as much as I can, possibly, or as possible. So, okay, guys, thank you for that, and we will see you. And then also don't forget 8 p.m. Central, Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Central Time. We're going to start doing lives, and that way, yeah. Okay, see y'all later.